Remember this guy? I used him back in the very first sermon of the series we just finished. I used it to illustrate a point about the brutality of stoning. Now, what you don't know is that before I found this guy and his brothers, I could only find something else for that same illustration. On him. That's not nearly as imposing. Obviously, it's not full size. It looks, just doesn't look right. Doesn't have the same visual impact as his bigger brother here. Now, the problem I've got is now that the series is done, and Rachel will attest to this, I have half a dozen of these things sitting around the house. They're just gathering dust, and I'm not really sure what to do with them. And then it came to me this week. Here we are. We are observing Christ the King Sunday. And that means we are sitting right on the brink of Advent. We are getting ready to celebrate Christmas. And we read Luke's passage here about Jesus on the cross, and it hit me what I needed to do. Say hello to my new friend here, our newest Christmas ornament. Gonna go right on the tree, I think right between Snoopy and my talking Star Trek ornament. Now I know what you're thinking. What a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? I can read your minds. I mean, you can have your Christmas stars on the tree and your silver bells and candy canes and Santa sleighs and the mistletoe and all that. But this year, this is a timely reminder of what Christmas ultimately means. And that's part of the lesson of Christ the King Sunday. Now here's something else you maybe didn't know. In Latin, this part of the skull here, the very top, that's called the calvarium. And somewhere during the 1300s, that was anglicized to the English word Calvary. Which is why we call it, that's why one of the names of the place where Jesus was executed is called Calvary. It's called Calvary, that's after Calvarium, which comes from the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible. Calvarium is a Latin translation of the Greek word Golgotha, which is a Hellenized version of the Aramaic Golgotha, which is related to the Hebrew Golgolet, all of which mean the skull. Or more likely, in context, it means the place of the skull. And that maybe was literally true that was the place of skulls, because unless space was needed to execute more criminals, bodies were often left to hang on crosses for weeks and months at a time. But it's more likely that the skull or the place of the skull is just kind of a colorful metaphor for place of death, which it certainly was. I used to watch History Channel a lot, back before it became the home of reality shows and Ancient Aliens. And I remember watching a program once where a biblical scholar made the statement that Roman crucifixion was really just high-concept advertising. It was done in the most public place that the Romans could find. It was done in the most brutal way that they could imagine. It inflicted the most pain and humiliation that it possibly could. And all of that was to get across one simple message: don't mess with Rome. And in a territory as restive as Palestine was, you can assume that a place of execution like Golgotha would get a pretty regular workout. We can assume that many souls would have been sent to judgment on the slopes of Golgotha. And that anybody who lived in or traveled through Jerusalem would know that this is the place where dreams went to die. So my new ornament here. This is a reminder of today's gospel reading from Luke. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there. And it's such a somber passage. Why do we want to remember the crucifixion on the brink of a joyous time like Christmas? For our calendars, why do we remember this at a time just before we celebrate Thanksgiving? It seems incongruous. Why would we use this image of Jesus pouring out his life on the cross? After all, this is the springboard to Advent. Counting of days to Christmas. Why do we do it? Because Jesus came to do just this. Because humanity was lost. Because human beings, great and small, one and all, took the divine gift of free will. They took that spark within us that is God's gift of self-awareness and choice. They took that and warped and twisted it to justify us meeting our own needs and our own desires instead of God's. Too often, in the exercise of free will, we find ourselves only pursuing our own dreams of sin, our own longing for things to which we are not really entitled, until we were split irrevocably from God. Lost in the darkness of our own making, all of us. Only one light could save us. Only one beacon could guide us out of that darkness. Only one hope could lift us out of that pit that we had fallen into and back into God's light. And that one hope and one light was and is God's Son. And the only way to make that happen would be for God's Son to be incarnated in human form, in human flesh, with a human heart that could love and be broken, with a human mind that could be challenged by the ways of the world, tempted, with a human will that could either cling faithfully to God or fall away to sin. the end of a successful ministry. A successful ministry of salvation and mercy would stand Golgotha's cross. One last test. One last hurdle for Jesus. One last chance to break with God, or to break the chains that bind all of us to sin. The skull is a reminder that on that most horrific of days, with his executioners sneering and the crowds mocking and his mother weeping at his feet, as Jesus groaned through that slow dance of death that is crucifixion, on that very day, one of the men being executed with him was taunting him for not saving himself. On that very day, Jesus still clung to the path of mercy and grace. He did that by granting forgiveness to the other thief, the one who had just called out to him. And in that moment, Jesus showed us all that grace and forgiveness are possible even up to the moment of death. And not only that, we learn that when we reach out to Jesus and ask for forgiveness, when we acknowledge who Jesus is, when we finally admit we can't get out of this trap of sin ourselves, but we can do it with Jesus' help. At that very moment, we are forgiven ourselves. We know that because Jesus says when he promises to the thief, "Today you shall be with me in paradise." Doesn't say, next Tuesday. Doesn't say after a stint in purgatory. He says, "Today you shall be with me." So take away the angels, take away the shepherds and the wise men, stable and the manger. At this moment, on the slopes of Golgotha, the place of the skull, is what Christmas is about. The promise of salvation. And not just the promise of salvation, but the promise that once we are saved, we will all stand in the presence of Jesus himself, King of Kings, when that day comes. And that all happened at the place of the skull. But it only happened because Jesus loved us enough to come gather us home. Jesus loved us enough to become one of us at Christmas. On Christ the King Sunday, we celebrate the reign of Christ the King. But it's also the time when we should marvel at the journey of Christ the man, who lived and died for us. We should marvel at the love that was lived out on the slopes of Golgotha.